the rotor synchronized yet.
Running the sequence now, almost there.
We need that intercept decoded within the hour.
In the summer of 1940, Alan Turing was 37 years old and living in a converted Victorian mansion in the Buckinghamshire countryside, sharing the grounds with several hundred other people who had been gathered there because they were the best mathematical and analytical minds in Britain. The mansion was Bletchley Park. The people were the code breakers who were trying to break the German military's Enigma cipher, the encrypted communication system that the German military relied on for every significant operational communication, from the orders that directed U-boat wolf packs to the messages that coordinated the Luftwaffe's attacks on Britain. Without the ability to read those communications, the Allies were fighting blind, responding to German operations after they had already begun, unable to anticipate the movement of the U-boats that were sinking the supply ships that kept Britain alive, unable to prepare for the air attacks that were destroying British cities. With the ability to read those communications, with a specific intelligence advantage that breaking Enigma would provide, the Allies could anticipate, could route convoys around U-boat concentrations, could intercept German operations before they achieved surprise, could know the German order of battle with a specificity that no intelligence service had ever achieved against any major military power. Turing solved the problem, not alone. The work at Bletchley Park was collective, and the specific contributions of Gordon Welchman, Dilly Knox, and dozens of others were essential to the overall achievement. But Turing's contribution was the most fundamental, and the specific mathematical insights that he brought to the problem of breaking the four-rotor naval Enigma, the variant that the German U-boat command used, and that had defeated the British code breakers for 9 months in 1942 to 43, were insights that no one else in the program had produced. The bomb machine that Turing designed, based on the Polish bomba that the Polish code breakers had developed before the war and that had been shared with the British, was a specific mechanical device that made the systematic breaking of Enigma possible. The bomb searched through the millions of possible Enigma settings to find the specific setting that had been used to encrypt a given message, using the specific mathematical properties of the Enigma system that Turing had identified to constrain the search to a manageable number of possibilities. Without the bomb, breaking Enigma would have required thousands of years of computation. With the bomb, the same task could be accomplished in hours. The specific military consequences of this achievement are one of the most studied questions in the history of the Second World War. The consensus of the historical scholarship is that the ultra-intelligence, the code name for the intelligence derived from the broken Enigma communications, shortened the war in Europe by at least 2 years, probably more. The specific battles where Ultra made the decisive difference, the Battle of the Atlantic, the North Africa Campaign, the Normandy landings, are battles whose outcomes were shaped by the specific intelligence advantage that Turing's mathematical work had made possible. 2 years of war in the specific conditions of 1944 and 1945 meant millions of lives. The specific calculation that the code breaking shortened the war by 2 years, and that 2 years of the war would have killed approximately 2 million additional people, is an estimate rather than a precise figure, but it is the order of magnitude that the historical scholarship supports. Turing saved more lives through the specific mathematical work he did at Bletchley Park than almost any military commander of the entire conflict. In 1952, the British government prosecuted Turing for gross indecency under the law that criminalized homosexual acts between consenting adult men. He was convicted. The sentence was chemical castration, the administration of estrogen hormones as an alternative to prison. He died on June 7, 1954, at the age of 41 of cyanide poisoning. The inquest returned a verdict of suicide. The country he had saved prosecuted him for who he was and killed him. Before I tell the full story of what Turing did and what was done to him, I want to ask you directly, subscribe if you haven't already. The final episode of this series is about General Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, the man who took Singapore in 70 days and then fought a rearguard action in the Philippines that ended in his execution by the same army that had beaten him, in a war crimes trial whose specific legal reasoning has been disputed by legal scholars ever since. Subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss the last episode. And if this episode, the most painful episode of this series, gives you something, hit the like button. Back to Turing. Back to the man who saved the war and was destroyed by the country that used him. The specific scientific and mathematical legacy of Turing. The body of work he produced in the 12 years between his Cambridge graduation and his death is one of the most remarkable records of intellectual productivity in the history of mathematics and computer science. And it deserves examination in its own right as part of the full accounting of who Turing was and what was lost when he died at 41. The 1936 paper on computable numbers established the theoretical framework for all subsequent computation. The wartime work at Bletchley Park produced the specific code-breaking achievements that shortened the war. The 1950 paper on computing machinery and intelligence established the foundational questions of artificial intelligence. These three contributions alone would have established a scientific legacy of the first order. But Turing was also working, in the years before his death, on problems in mathematical biology, specifically on the question of how complex patterns arise in nature from simple chemical processes. His 1952 paper on the chemical basis of morphogenesis, published in the same year as his prosecution, addressed the specific question of how the symmetry breaking that produces patterns like stripes and spots in animals could arise from the specific mathematics of reaction diffusion systems. The paper predicted the existence of specific chemical patterns that were not confirmed experimentally until decades after his death, and it is now considered one of the foundational papers in the field of mathematical biology. He was working on problems in physics and in neurological function in the period before his death, following the specific trails that his exceptional mathematical mind was pursuing in directions that the historical record preserves only as the early stages of investigations that were never completed. What he would have contributed to these fields if he had lived another 30 years, if the prosecution had not happened, if the chemical castration had not disrupted his intellectual functioning, if the death at 41 had not cut off the work, is a counterfactual that cannot be calculated, but that the record of his 12 years of intellectual productivity invites. The specific historical argument that has been made that the interruption of Turing's work by the prosecution and the death cost science a generation of progress in computing and artificial intelligence is an argument that is impossible to verify, but that the specific trajectory of his work makes credible. He was asking the right questions. He was asking them decades before the mainstream of his fields caught up with them. The specific combination of mathematical depth and intellectual breadth that characterized his work was producing contributions in multiple fields simultaneously, and the death at 41 closed off lines of inquiry that his specific mind was uniquely positioned to pursue. The imitation game, the specific test that Turing proposed in his 1950 paper, has become one of the organizing benchmarks of artificial intelligence development, and the specific question it asks, whether a machine can produce responses indistinguishable from those of a human, has been the specific question that has driven much of the development of natural language processing and conversational AI in the decades since. The specific benchmark is now achievable by large language models in ways that Turing could not have anticipated, and the specific question of what this achievement means, whether it constitutes machine intelligence in any meaningful sense, or merely machine imitation of intelligence, is a question that the field continues to debate. Turing's specific contribution to the debate, his argument that the question of whether machines can think is best addressed through the behavioral test rather than through the philosophical analysis of what thinking means, was a specific methodological contribution that directed the field away from metaphysics and toward empirical investigation. Whether the direction was ultimately the right one is a question that the field continues to debate. That it was a specific, influential direction that shaped the subsequent development of the field is not in doubt. He posed a question. The question organized the field. The field has been pursuing the answer for 70 years. He died at 41, having posed it. The specific relationship between Turing's theoretical contributions and the specific digital devices that have been built on their foundation is one that the history of technology has documented extensively. The computers, the smartphones, the networks, the artificial intelligence systems, all of these are, in the mathematical sense that Turing established in 1936, Turing machines. The theoretical architecture he described in a 1936 paper about a hypothetical computing device is a theoretical architecture on which the entire digital infrastructure of the contemporary world has been built. This is not a metaphor or an exaggeration. It is a specific mathematical fact that computer scientists have documented, that the theoretical model Turing described in 1936, the simple hypothetical machine that could read and write symbols on a tape according to a fixed set of rules, is equivalent in computational power to any computer that has ever been built or that can be built, in the specific sense that anything that any computer can do can in principle be done by a Turing machine. The specific architecture of the digital world is the architecture that Turing described at 24. He described a digital age before it existed. He built one of its essential instruments at Bletchley Park. He founded the theoretical discipline that has designed the rest of it. He was dead at 41, having been prosecuted by the government of the country that relied on his genius. The specific moral of the Turing story, that exceptional contributions to human knowledge and human survival do not protect a person who makes them from the specific injustices of society they live in, is one that the historical record presents with painful clarity. His genius did not protect him. His wartime contribution did not protect him. His citizenship of the country he had helped save did not protect him. He was prosecuted for who he was. He was destroyed by the prosecution. He died at 41. The 50-pound note with his face on it was introduced in 2021. He has been dead since 1954. The apology came in 2009. The pardon came in 2013. The broader pardon for others convicted under the same law came in 2017. All of this is the Turing War. The bomb and the broken codes and the shortened war and the saved lives and the prosecution and the chemical castration and the death at 41 and the apology and the pardon and the banknote that came decades too late. All of it belongs in the same accounting. That is the Turing War, the broader moral question that the Turing story poses about the relationship between the society and the individuals whose contributions to that society's survival are then criminalized, is one that extends far beyond Turing's specific case to the general question of how societies treat people whose personal qualities they find objectionable, while simultaneously depending on what those people can do. The specific pattern of the Turing story, the exceptional contribution, the prosecution, the destruction, was not unique to Turing. The criminalization of homosexual acts between consenting adult men in Britain between 1885 and 2003 produced specific prosecutions and specific destroyed lives throughout the period, and the specific individuals who were prosecuted were not primarily people whose wartime contributions to British survival were on the historical record. They were ordinary people whose ordinary lives were disrupted or destroyed by the specific operation of a law that criminalized who they were. Turing is the most famous person prosecuted under these laws because his wartime contribution became publicly known after the ultra-secret was disclosed. Before 1974, he was simply a mathematical genius who had been prosecuted for gross indecency and who had died young. After 1974, the specific context of his prosecution, the prosecution of the man who had broken Enigma, became known, and the specific injustice became visible in a way that the secrecy had prevented. The specific men who were prosecuted under the same laws during the same period, who did not have Turing's wartime contributions in the historical record, who were ordinary people doing ordinary things, deserve acknowledgement alongside Turing's case, because their stories are the broader story of which is the most dramatic example. The tens of thousands of prosecutions under the Criminal Law Amendment Act and its successors represent a specific institutional harm that the Turing case has made visible, but that extended far beyond Turing. The specific 2013 pardon, which pardoned Turing but not the other men convicted under the same laws, reflected the specific cultural function that the Turing case had come to serve. It was easier to pardon the famous code breaker than to acknowledge the general injustice of the law under which he was convicted. The broader pardon for the other men convicted under the same laws was not granted until 2017, when the Policing and Crime Act included a general pardon for all men convicted of consensual same-sex acts that would not be offenses under current law. The specific limitation of the pardon as an instrument of historical justice, that it acknowledges an injustice that has already been done without being able to undo it, is one that the Turing case illustrates with particular sharpness. He was dead. The pardon was posthumous. The specific harm that was done to him, the prosecution, the chemical castration, the loss of security clearance, the death at 41, was not addressed by the pardon in the sense that a living person's pardon addresses the specific legal consequences of their conviction. What the pardon did was establish, in a formal institutional statement, that what was done to Turing was wrong. This is not nothing. The specific formal acknowledgement of institutional injustice has a moral significance that the purely historical record does not provide in the same way. But it is also not enough. And the specific people who have been most attentive to the Turing story have generally treated the pardon as inadequate to the scale of the injustice. The specific cultural legacy of Alan Turing, the name given to the Turing Award, the most prestigious prize in computer science, the face on the 50-pound note that was introduced in 2021, the specific recognition that has accrued to his name in the decades since the ultra-secret was disclosed, is part of the post-war history of the world that his work made possible. The digital age that his theoretical contributions helped establish has produced specific monuments to his memory, and the specific name Turing has become one of the most recognized names in the history of computing and mathematics. The specific irony of this recognition, that the man who was prosecuted and chemically castrated and driven to his death by his government is now commemorated on British currency, and in the name of the most important prize in his field, is one that the honest historical accounting acknowledges without being able to resolve. The recognition cannot undo the harm. The posthumous honor cannot address the living person who was destroyed. He is on a 50-pound note. He was prosecuted under a law that remained in force for 49 years after his death. The specific moral of this specific story is one that the historical record presents without the comfortable resolution that the dramatic form sometimes provides. The specific question of what Turing's life and death mean for the contemporary world. For the specific questions about the treatment of LGBTQ plus people in societies that continue to criminalize or discriminate against them. For the specific question of what societies owe to the people whose contributions they rely on is a question that the historical record cannot answer, but that it illuminates. The pattern is this. A person of exceptional ability contributes enormously to the society that has formed them. The society then prosecutes them for who they are. The prosecution destroys them, and the historical record acknowledges both the contribution and the destruction, decades after the person is dead, when the acknowledgement can no longer help them. Turing is the most dramatic example of this pattern that the Second World War produced. He is not the only example, and the specific war that the code-breaking helped win was itself fought in the name of the specific human dignity that the prosecution of Turing denied. The Allied powers fought the Second World War in the name of, among other things, the principle that human beings should not be persecuted for who they are, that the Nazi regime's persecution of Jews, of Roma, of homosexual people, of disabled people, of political opponents, was an evil that required defeating. The specific prosecution of Alan Turing was a prosecution of a person for who he was, conducted by the same country that fought the war in the name of the principle that such prosecutions were wrong. This specific contradiction, the country that fought against persecution, persecuting one of the people whose work had most contributed to the victory, is not a paradox that the historical record resolves. It is a specific historical fact that the honest accounting of the Second World War and its aftermath requires acknowledging. He broke the codes. The code saved lives. The country prosecuted him. He died at 41. That is the Turing War, the full accounting, the contribution and the destruction, the bomb and the prosecution, the lives saved and the life taken, belongs in the same story, because it is the same story. The man who saved more lives than any soldier was destroyed by the country he saved. That is the full accounting. The specific community of people who worked at Bletchley Park, the mathematicians, linguists, chess players, classicists, and crossword solvers who were recruited for their specific ability to think in unconventional ways about structured problems, was one of the more remarkable intellectual communities assembled in any wartime institution, and its specific character illuminates both the achievement it produced and the specific social context in which Turing worked. Bletchley Park recruited from Cambridge and Oxford primarily, drawing on the specific networks of dons and their students that the intelligence services had cultivated in the years before the war. The specific criteria for recruitment were not the conventional criteria of the civil service or the military, the ability to pass examinations, the appropriate social background, the conventional markers of institutional reliability. They were the specific ability to solve problems that no one had been able to solve before, to think about structured systems in ways that conventional training did not produce. This specific recruitment criterion produced a community that was, by the standards of 1940s British institutional culture, unusually diverse in specific ways that mattered to this story. The Bletchley Park community included a higher proportion of women than almost any comparable wartime intelligence institution. Women who were doing the mathematical and analytical work that the code breaking required, working alongside the men who had been recruited from the same universities. It included people whose specific intellectual and personal qualities put them outside the conventional social norms of the period. People who, in the peacetime institutional culture of Britain, would have found their careers constrained by who they were. Turing was one of these. His specific intellectual qualities, the unconventional thinking, the specific ability to see mathematical structures in ways that others did not, were exactly the qualities that the Bletchley Park recruitment was designed to find. His personal qualities, the unwillingness to perform conventional social rituals of British institutional culture, the directness, the specific eccentricities that his colleagues at Bletchley remember with affection, were tolerated at Bletchley in ways that they might not have been in other institutions. The specific wartime context, the urgency, the specific institutional focus on results rather than on conventional behavior, created a temporary space in which Turing could work effectively without the constant friction that his personal qualities produced in more conventional environments. Bletchley was not a tolerant institution in the sense of being welcoming of who people were. It was a focused institution that cared about what people could do, and the specific wartime focus on what Turing could do created a temporary accommodation that the peacetime return to conventional institutional culture would eliminate. The specific relationships that Turing formed at Bletchley Park, the working relationships with Gordon Welchman and Hugh Alexander and the other mathematicians who made the central code-breaking contributions, and the personal relationships with colleagues who became genuine friends, were some of the most important relationships of his life. The accounts of his Bletchley colleagues uniformly describe a man who was genuinely liked, who had a specific warmth alongside the eccentricities, and whose intellectual company was one of the distinctive pleasures of working at Bletchley. Gordon Welchman, whose specific contribution to the bomb design, the addition of the diagonal bore that dramatically improved its effectiveness, was the most important single improvement to Turing's original design, described their working relationship as one of genuine collaborative intellectual excitement. Two people of exceptional ability working on the same problem, bringing different specific approaches, and finding that the combination produced results that neither would have achieved alone. This was a specific character of the most productive working relationships at Bletchley. The women of Bletchley Park, who comprised approximately 2/3 of the total workforce at its peak, were doing specific operational work of running the bombs, processing the decoded messages, translating the German text, and maintaining continuous operational output that the intelligence system required. The specific recognition that the women of Bletchley have received in the historical record has improved substantially in recent decades, partly because of the work of historians who have specifically documented their contributions, and partly because of the public attention that the Turing story has generated. The specific women who ran the bomb machines, who understood the specific operational principles of the device, and who maintained a continuous output of results that the intelligence system depended on, were doing work that required both technical competence and physical endurance, in conditions of considerable secrecy, and without the specific public recognition that the military service of their male contemporaries received. Their contribution was essential. Their recognition was delayed. The full accounting of Bletchley Park requires acknowledging them alongside Turing and the male mathematicians who have received more attention. The specific decision to keep the ultra-secret, to maintain the secrecy of the Bletchley Park achievement after the war, was one of the most consequential intelligence decisions of the post-war period, with specific consequences for the historical accounting of the war and for the specific individuals whose contributions could not be publicly acknowledged. The ultra-secret was maintained for 30 years after the end of the war. The specific participants, the mathematicians, the code breakers, the intelligence officers, were bound by the Official Secrets Act not to disclose what they had done. The specific consequence for Turing was that the most important contribution he had made to the Allied victory could not be publicly acknowledged during his lifetime. When he was prosecuted in 1952, the specific military importance of his wartime work which might have influenced the treatment he received, could not be stated publicly. The specific irony of this, that the man who had made one of the most important contributions to Britain's survival in the war could not have that contribution acknowledged when the state was prosecuting him, is one of the more painful dimensions of the Turing story. His wartime work was secret. His prosecution was public. The public knew that he had been convicted of gross indecency. They did not know what he had done at Bletchley Park. The specific combination of public condemnation and secret honor is one of the more complete forms of institutional betrayal in the historical record. The ultra-secret was finally disclosed in 1974 when F.H. Hensley and others received permission to publish the official history of British intelligence in the Second World War, and when the specific story of Bletchley Park, the code-breaking, the bomb machines, the operational intelligence that had shaped the Allied conduct of the war, became public knowledge for the first time. By 1974, Turing had been dead for 20 years. The specific books and films and plays and television programs that have told the Turing story since then, culminating in the 2014 film The Imitation Game, which brought the story to the widest popular audiences reached, have done the essential work of public acknowledgement that the secrecy had prevented for 3 decades. The Imitation Game has significant historical inaccuracies and has been criticized by historians for its specific distortions of the Bletchley Park story. But its achievement, bringing Turing's name and his specific contribution to the attention of hundreds of millions of people who had never heard of him, is a real cultural achievement alongside the historical liberties it takes. The specific historical inaccuracies of the Imitation Game are worth noting because they illustrate the specific tension between dramatic narrative requirements and historical accuracy that biographical films consistently face. The film presents Turing as a more isolated and more dramatically conflicted figure than the historical record supports. His Bletchley colleagues have noted that the film's portrait of his relationships with his colleagues is significantly less warm and collaborative than the actual account suggests. The film also presents the Enigma breakthrough as more dramatically singular than the historical reality of a collective, sustained, collaborative achievement. But the film's essential contribution, the public acknowledgement of what Turing did and what was done to him, is a genuine contribution to the historical record's accessibility. The people who learned about Turing from a film and then pursued the fuller historical account have been served by the film even when the film oversimplified. The specific question of what Turing's mathematical work means for the history of human thought, not just for the Second World War, but for the subsequent development of computing and artificial intelligence, is one that the longer historical view requires engaging with. The theoretical framework that Turing established in his 1936 paper, The Turing Machine, the Computability Theory, the specific analysis of what can and cannot be computed algorithmically, is the mathematical foundation of every computer and every program that has been built since. The specific digital devices that have transformed human life in the decades since his death, the computers, the smartphones, the networks, are all, in the specific mathematical sense, Turing machines. The theoretical architecture he described in 1936 is a theoretical architecture on which the entire digital age has been built. The specific question he posed in his 1950 paper, can machines think? Is the organizing question of artificial intelligence and the specific test he proposed, the Turing test, in which a machine is considered to be thinking if a human interrogator cannot distinguish its responses from those of a human, is a specific benchmark against which artificial intelligence development has been measured for 70 years. He invented the theoretical computer before computers existed. He posed the question of machine intelligence before there were machines intelligent enough to raise the question seriously. He did these things before he was 38 years old. He was dead at 41. The full accounting of what was lost when Alan Turing died at 41, the specific mathematical contributions that he would have made in the subsequent decades, the specific questions about computation and intelligence that a particular mind would have asked and answered, is a counterfactual that cannot be calculated. But the specific achievements that he did make, the theoretical computer, the code breaking, the founding of artificial intelligence, are a record of what a single human mind of exceptional quality can contribute in 41 years, and they are a measure of what the prosecution and the death cost the world. He saved more lives than almost any soldier who ever lived. The country he saved prosecuted him for who he was. He died at 41. That is the essential accounting. That is what was done to Alan Turing by the country that used his genius and then destroyed him. That is the Turing War. Alan Matheson Turing was born in London in 1912, the son of a civil servant in the Indian colonial service, and had grown up in a specifically English middle-class institutional environment. Boarding schools, church, the specific social world of the professional upper middle class that sent its sons to Cambridge and expected them to produce the kind of distinguished service that the empire required. He had gone to Cambridge, had studied mathematics with a focus and ability that made him one of the most gifted mathematicians of his generation, and had produced, by the age of 24, a paper that is now considered one of the founding documents of computer science. The 1936 paper, On Computable Numbers, with an application to the Einstein problem, addressed a fundamental question in mathematical logic that had been posed by David Hilbert: whether there exists a definite procedure for deciding the truth or falsity of any mathematical proposition. Turing's answer was no, and the specific mechanism he used to prove the answer, the theoretical device now called a Turing machine, a hypothetical computing device that could perform any calculation that could be described algorithmically, established the theoretical foundation for the digital computer. He was 24 when he wrote this paper. The paper described a theoretical machine that did not yet exist, and that would not exist in practice for another decade. But the theoretical framework it established was a mathematical foundation on which all subsequent computer science has been built. The specific contribution of this paper to the history of human knowledge is, by the assessment of mathematicians and computer scientists, one of the half-dozen most important contributions to the theory of computation in the 20th century. He had also, in the late 1930s, spent time at Princeton working with the American mathematical and logical community, developing the specific cross-disciplinary connections that would prove important when the wartime need for applied mathematical talent brought together people from very different institutional backgrounds. He returned to Britain in 1939, and when the war began, was recruited into the government code and cipher school at Bletchley Park. The specific work that Turing did at Bletchley Park between 1939 and 1945 is now one of the most studied episodes in the history of intelligence and cryptanalysis, and the successive declassifications of the ultra-secret. The specific security classification that covered the Bletchley Park work, maintained for 30 years after the war, had produced a historical record of considerable detail. The core of Turing's contribution was a mathematical analysis of the Enigma system's specific weaknesses, the ways in which the machine's design constrained the space of possible settings in ways that a sufficiently clever search procedure could exploit. The Enigma machine was not simply a cipher. It was a cipher machine that changed its settings with every letter typed, producing a different encryption for each keystroke. The specific mathematical problem of breaking Enigma was therefore not the problem of finding a single key, but the problem of finding the settings that the machine had been using when a specific message was encrypted. The bomb machine that Turing designed was a specific device that made this search tractable. It worked by exploiting the specific property of Enigma that a letter could never be encrypted as itself, a constraint that arose from the machine's physical design and that allowed the bomb to eliminate incorrect settings rapidly. With sufficient bombs running simultaneously, the correct Enigma settings for a day's messages could be found hours. The German naval Enigma, the variant used by the U-boat command, added a fourth rotor to the standard three-rotor Army and Air Force version, which dramatically increased the number of possible settings and defeated the existing bomb design. The 9-month blackout of naval Enigma intelligence in 1942-43, the period when the U-boats were sinking ships at their most catastrophic rate, when the Battle of the Atlantic was at its most dangerous, was directly related to the specific difficulty of breaking the four-rotor naval Enigma. Turing's solution to the four-rotor problem, the specific mathematical analysis that eventually allowed the naval Enigma to be broken, was the achievement that most directly affected the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic, and it was a specific contribution that the historical scholarship has identified as the most militarily consequential of his wartime work. The specific intelligence that the broken naval Enigma provided, the U-boat positions, the convoy routing, the operational orders that Donitz was sending to his wolf packs, was the essential foundation of the Allied anti-submarine effort that turned the Battle of the Atlantic in May 1943. The Admiralty's ability to route convoys around U-boat concentrations, to direct escort groups to U-boat positions, to know in advance where the wolf packs were being deployed. All of this depended on the continuous reading of the naval Enigma that Turing's mathematical work had made possible. The specific relationship between Turing's work and the D-Day landings is another dimension of the ultra-achievement that the historical scholarship has documented. The specific intelligence about German force dispositions, about the German deception response to Operation Fortitude, about the specific state of the German defenses in Normandy, all of this was derived from the broken Enigma traffic that Bletchley Park was reading throughout the planning and execution of the Normandy campaign. Turing was not simply a mathematician sitting in a hut solving theoretical puzzles. He was a central intellectual force of the most important intelligence operation in the history of warfare, producing the specific mathematical insights that made the operation possible and contributing to the ongoing work of breaking the succession of improved German cipher systems as they were introduced throughout the war. After the war, Turing returned to academic mathematics with a specific focus on the theoretical foundations of computation that had characterized his pre-war work. He produced another paper of fundamental importance, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, published in 1950, which posed a question that has since been called the Turing test. Can machines think? The paper is one of the founding documents of artificial intelligence, and the specific question it posed has been the organizing question of the field ever since. He was living an ordinary academic life, working at the University of Manchester, pursuing the mathematical and biological interests that occupied his post-war years, living quietly as a gay man in a society that criminalized what he was, when the prosecution that ended his life began. In January 1952, Turing reported a burglary at his home to the Manchester police. The investigation that followed revealed that he had been in a sexual relationship with a 19-year-old man, and under the specific provisions of the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, the same law under which Oscar Wilde had been prosecuted in 1895. Turing was charged with gross indecency. He did not deny the relationship. He had, apparently, no full understanding of the specific legal risk that the honesty he brought to everything else in his life would produce in this specific circumstance. He was convicted in March 1952. The judge offered him a choice between prison and probation with the condition of chemical castration, the administration of estrogen hormone injections that were supposed to reduce sexual drive. He chose the hormones over prison. For a year, he received the injections, which produced physical changes including the development of breast tissue, and which affected his intellectual and emotional functioning in specific ways that the historical record captures in the accounts of his friends and colleagues who observed the change. The security service also revoked his security clearance, which ended his ability to contribute to the cryptographic work he had done during the war. The specific irony that the country whose survival his work had contributed to was now treating him as a security risk because of his sexual orientation was an irony that the historical record preserves without softening. He died on June 7, 1954. He was found dead in his bedroom. A half-eaten apple was beside his body. The inquest found that he had died of cyanide poisoning. The verdict was suicide. Whether the apple was a vehicle for cyanide, whether the specific symbolic resonance of the apple was intentional, has been debated since his death, and the debate has not been definitively resolved. His mother, who survived him, maintained that the death was accidental, that he had been conducting chemical experiments in his home laboratory and had accidentally ingested cyanide. The accidental death theory has not been widely accepted, but neither has the specific symbolism of the apple been established beyond doubt. The historical record leaves the specific circumstances of his death in the ambiguity that characterizes too many of the most painful historical facts. The British government did not formally apologize to Turing until 2009, when Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a statement acknowledging that the treatment he had received was appalling and deeply unjust. The Queen granted him a posthumous pardon in 2013. Both the apology and the pardon came more than 50 years after his death, and neither could address the specific harm that had been done to the specific person who was no longer alive to receive them. The specific laws under which he had been prosecuted were partially decriminalized in 1967 and fully decriminalized in 2003. The specific men who were prosecuted under those laws between 1885 and 2003, the specific people whose lives were destroyed by the criminalization of who they were, number in the tens of thousands. Turing is the most famous of them. He is not the only one. The full accounting of what was done to Turing requires acknowledging both what he gave and what was taken from him. He gave his mathematical genius to the problem of breaking Enigma, and the specific result of that gift was the shortening of the war and the saving of millions of lives. He gave his intellectual honesty to the problem of understanding the theoretical limits of computation, and the specific result of that gift was the founding of computer science. He gave his honesty to the police officer who was investigating his burglary, and the specific result of that honesty was his prosecution, his chemical castration, and his death at 41. The country that received these gifts prosecuted him for who he was. The laws that prosecuted him were not changed until 13 years after his death. The formal acknowledgement of the injustice did not come for 55 years. And the specific person who was harmed, the mathematician who was more important to the Allied victory than most of the generals who commanded the armies that fought it, was dead at 41, having been destroyed by the country he had helped save. That is the Turing War, the code breaking in the mathematics, and the millions of lives saved, and the prosecution, and the chemical castration, and the apple, and the death at 41. He saved more lives than almost any soldier who ever lived. The country he saved prosecuted him for who he was and drove him to his death. That is the full accounting. That is what was done. That is what deserved to be remembered alongside the Enigma and the bomb and the lives that the code breaking saved. That is the Turing War. The specific individuals who knew Turing personally, his Bletchley colleagues, his academic colleagues at Manchester, the friends who observed the specific changes that the chemical castration produced, represent the human record of who he was as a person rather than as a historical figure, and their accounts are essential to the full picture. Christopher Morcom was Turing's first love, a schoolfellow at Sherborne who died of tuberculosis in 1930 when they were both teenagers. The specific impact of Morcom's death on Turing, the way it shaped his thinking about consciousness and about the relationship between mind and physical matter, is documented in the letters and journal entries that the historical record preserves. The death of the first person he loved at 18 is part of the full human story of who Turing was and how he came to ask the questions he asked. Joan Clark was a fellow codebreaker at Bletchley Park with whom Turing was briefly engaged, in a relationship that both of them understood was not what either of them was looking for in the full sense. Clark knew that Turing was gay and accepted it, but that reflected the genuine friendship and intellectual partnership that characterized the best of the Bletchley working relationships. Clark survived Turing by many decades and gave account of their relationship that are part of the historical record of who he was. The specific friends who visited Turing in the year after the prosecution, who observed the specific physical and intellectual changes that the hormone treatment produced, describe a man who was less himself, slower, more uncertain, physically changed in ways that were visible and that he accepted with a specific stoic dignity that his friends found painful to observe. He continued to work. He continued to pursue the mathematical problems that interested him. He was diminished. He was not destroyed, in the sense that he continued to function, but the specific person they had known was less present, and the specific damage that the treatment had done was visible. Nick Furbank, the biographer of E.M. Forster who knew Turing in his final years, gave accounts of their last meeting that are part of the record. Robin Gandy, Turing's student and close friend, gave accounts of the final period. The specific human texture of Turing's last months, the ordinary life that continued alongside the specific extraordinary damage, is preserved in these accounts in ways that the broad historical narrative tends to compress. He ran. He was an excellent long-distance runner who had come close to qualify for the 1948 British Olympic team, and the running that he continued in his final years was one of the specific physical activities through which the specific qualities of his character, the endurance, the willingness to accept discomfort in pursuit of a purpose, were visible in an ordinary way. He ran through the Cheshire countryside. He thought about mathematics. He worked on his current problems. He lived an ordinary life in the specific circumstances of extraordinary damage. The apple beside his body when he was found. The specific symbol, it was a symbol of the myth of Snow White, which he had loved, in which a poisoned apple produces a sleeping death from which the sleeper might wake. Whether the apple was deliberately chosen for its symbolic content, or whether it was simply the vehicle for cyanide, or whether the death was accidental as his mother believed, is a question that the historical record has not answered definitively. The ambiguity is itself part of the story. A man who was precise about mathematics and who chose his words and his symbols with care died in circumstances whose specific meaning is ambiguous. The apple might mean something. It might not. The specific uncertainty is one of the ways in which the historical record refuses to provide the clean resolution that the dramatic narrative of his story invites. He was dead. The specific meaning of the apple is uncertain. The specific meaning of his death, what it means for the history of the country that prosecuted him, and for the history of human knowledge, and for the broader history of how societies treat people whose contributions they depend on, is not uncertain. He saved more lives than almost any soldier who ever lived. The country he saved prosecuted him for who he was and drove him to his death. That is not uncertain. That is a specific historical fact that the full accounting requires stating clearly and without mitigation. The Turing War is a story of what exceptional human intelligence, applied in the service of a country's survival, produced and what that country did with the person who applied it. The contribution was extraordinary. The treatment was unjust. The death was at 41. All of it is the Turing War. The specific question of what Alan Turing would have contributed to the development of computing and artificial intelligence if he had lived a normal lifespan, if the prosecution had not happened, if the death had not come at 41, is a counterfactual that the historical record invites without being able to answer. He was asking questions in 1950 that the mainstream of his fields would not reach for decades. The morphogenesis paper that he published in 1952, in the same year as the prosecution, was confirmed experimentally 40 years later. The questions he was asking about the relationship between mathematical computation and biological complexity, about the foundations of artificial intelligence, about the nature of thought, these were questions at the frontier of the fields he was defining. A Turing who lived to 75 or 80 would have been active in the period when the specific technologies that his theoretical foundations enabled became practical realities. The transistor was invented in 1947. The first programmable computers were built in the late 1940s and early 1950s. The period from the 1950s through the 1980s was a period when the theoretical framework Turing had established in 1936 was being built into practical devices at an accelerating pace. His specific mathematical understanding of what computation was and what its limits were, deeper than that of almost anyone else in the field, would have been an extraordinary resource for the development of those devices. The specific questions he was asking about artificial intelligence in 1950 were questions that the field would not reach a practical stage of addressing until the 2010s and 2020s, when the specific development of deep learning and large language models produced machines capable of the kind of performance on language tasks that the Turing test had been designed to assess. His specific methodological contribution, the behavioral approach to intelligence, the focus on what a system can do rather than on what it is made of, has been one of the most productive frameworks in the development of practical artificial intelligence. A Turing who lived to see this development would have been, at minimum, one of the most important intellectual commentators on what the development meant. At maximum, he might have been one of its architects. The specific combination of theoretical depth and practical focus that characterized his work was exactly the combination that the development of practical artificial intelligence required. This is a specific human cost of prosecution. Not the 41 years of life that were ended, but the specific intellectual contributions that those years would have produced in the specific period of technological development that was the most consequential in the history of human computation. He died before he could see any of it. He died before the transistor became the microchip. He died before the personal computer. He died before the internet. He died before the large language models that are now demonstrating the kind of conversational capability that his Turing test had been designed to assess. He described all of it in theoretical terms. He saw where it was going. He died at 41, having been prosecuted by his government for who he was. The specific institutions that prosecuted him, the police, the judiciary, the government, were operating within the specific legal framework of the period, applying the specific law that criminalized what he was. The specific individuals who applied the law to him were not exceptional villains. They were ordinary institutional actors applying ordinary institutional processes to a person who had been identified as having violated the law. This is a specific character of the institutional harm that the Turing case represents. It was not exceptional cruelty, but ordinary institutional process, applied with ordinary efficiency to a person whose exceptional contribution to the society that was prosecuting him was a secret that the institutional process did not know about and could not have taken into account even if it had known. The ordinary institutional process produced an extraordinary harm. The specific combination, the ordinary process, the extraordinary harm, is part of what makes the Turing case so instructive about the relationship between institutional systems and the individuals they process. He was not exceptional in the specific sense that the law treated him as exceptional. He was a person who had violated a specific law, and the specific institutional process treated him as any other person who had violated that law would have been treated. The extraordinary harm was a product of the ordinary process applied to an extraordinary person. The specific lesson this teaches about how ordinary institutional processes can produce extraordinary harms when the person being processed is extraordinary in ways the institution cannot see, is a lesson that extends far beyond the specific case of Turing and the specific law under which he was prosecuted. He saved more lives than any soldier. He was processed by an ordinary institutional system that could not see what he had done. He died at 41. That is the full accounting. That is what was done. That is the Turing War. The specific contemporary relevance of the Turing story, the ways in which his case illuminates ongoing questions about the treatment of LGBTQ plus people in societies that continue to criminalize or discriminate against them, and about the relationship between exceptional contribution and social acceptance, is one that deserves direct engagement. At the time of this recording, more than 60 countries continue to criminalize consensual same-sex acts between adults. The specific legal frameworks that these countries apply are, in their essential character, variants of the same legal framework under which Alan Turing was prosecuted in 1952. The specific harm that is done by these laws, the prosecution of people for who they are, the specific destruction of lives and careers and relationships, is being done in the contemporary world at a scale that exceeds anything that was happening in Britain in 1952. Turing's specific case has become one of the most cited examples of the harm that such laws produce, partly because of the specific visibility of his wartime contribution, and partly because of the specific clarity with which his case demonstrates the fundamental injustice of prosecuting people for consensual private acts between adults. The argument from his case, that the criminalization of homosexuality destroys the contributions that LGBTQ plus people make to their societies, is an argument that has been used in the campaigns for decriminalization and legal equality in multiple countries. The specific argument has a specific limitation. It argues for protection of LGBTQ plus people on the grounds of what they contribute rather than on the grounds of who they are. Turing deserved not to be prosecuted not because of what he had done at Bletchley Park, but because he was a human being whose consensual private life was not the business of the state. The argument from his contribution, while persuasive in specific political contexts, does not reach the fundamental moral principle that the criminalization of who people are is wrong regardless of what they have contributed. The fundamental principle requires no contribution to justify it. Turing's contribution makes his case a vivid illustration of the principle, but the principle stands without the contribution. The ordinary men who were prosecuted under the same law, who had not broken any codes and who had not founded any fields and whose names are not on any banknotes, deserve not to be prosecuted for exactly the same reason that Turing deserved not to be prosecuted. He saved more lives than any soldier. He was prosecuted for who he was. He died at 41. The prosecution would have been wrong even if he had contributed nothing. His contribution makes it more dramatically visible as wrong. The Turing Award, given annually since 1966 by the Association for Computing Machinery to individuals for contributions of lasting and major technical importance to the computing field, is the most prestigious prize in computer science. It is named for Alan Turing. The specific decision to name the award for Turing, made in the year of the award's establishment, before the ultra-secret was disclosed and before Turing's specific wartime contribution was publicly known, was a decision based solely on the theoretical contributions of the 1936 and 1950 papers, and it reflects a specific assessment of the computing community that these contributions were the most important in the history of the field. He is on the 50-pound note. The Turing Award bears his name. The Turing test organizes a field he founded. The Turing machine is the theoretical foundation of every computer ever built. He died at 41, prosecuted by the country he saved. That is the Turing War, the full accounting, the bomb and the ultra and the shortened war and the saved lives, and the 1936 paper and the 1950 paper and the morphogenesis and the prosecution and the chemical castration and the apple and the death at 41 and the apology and the pardon and the banknote and the award and the ongoing work in the field he founded is a full accounting of who Alan Turing was and what was done to him.